Let's now cross to GRN correspondent John Lillywhite, who's standing by in Amman. John, we saw yesterday that these protests were already dwindling, and then came this surprise announcement.
Yes, it was a surprise. I mean, if you looking back, there were signs of something like this. In the letter of appointment to the new Prime Minister, Omar al-Razzaz, King Abdullah II did mention that there needed to be a more equitable division between the poor and the wealthy within Amman, and there needed to be a kind of restructuring of wealth between the super rich, which you can see in all sorts of areas of the capital, and the rest of the country, which is very, very poor. And there was also the point that this new tax law was incredibly invasive. Basically, it was saying that everybody in the country would have 20% of their salary reduced at the end of every month. There was very little consultation, there was very little notice of this, and that in many ways explains why you have such a large geographical dispersal of people protesting all over the country, because the threat of having 20% of their salary reduced at the end of the month was imminent. There's also the point that all of this came on top of a lot of rumors and bad feeling already happening inside Amman. You had one MP, Hind al-Fayez, who was talking about how every government minister in Jordan would be given a Mercedes and a 5,000 JD a month salary on appointment, and 5,000 JD a month is a massive salary out here, where the average salary is between 300 to 500 JD a month, and the JD is about one JD is about 1.7 to the dollar. On top of that, you also had rumors of millions being spent on consultancies for Jordan to develop a nuclear program, all sorts of corruption in the private sector. So when the government really launched this tax policy, Jordanians were already talking about corruption, were already talking about the economic problems, were already talking about the foreign policy situation. And I think it all just developed into what you saw happen last week.
Now, John, based on what you're saying, it doesn't seem like this will spell an end for Jordan's problems. Tell us more about some of the other challenges that the country faces.
Well, it faces systemic problems in jobs, in education, in the carrying capacity of the state to provide water and energy for its citizens, as well as a very difficult situation on its border in Syria. At the same time, in a very way that many people might not have picked up on, if you look at these protests, they've been very, very peaceful. In the past, when the IMF has pushed subsidies on countries, in Sudan, in Chile, in Tunisia, and in Egypt in 1977, there were massive uprisings and violence. In 1977 in Cairo, hundreds of thousands of people were in the streets, and 100 people died, and up to 500 were injured. By contrast, in Amman, what's happened is these have been very, very peaceful protests, and you've also had a bit of humor there. You've had, one girl earlier this week held up a protest saying, "Please, government, go away. My father doesn't like me being out late, and I shouldn't be out here protesting." Another person had a sign saying, "We're not ATM machines." So on one level, it is actually impressive that given the threat of these tax hikes, the protests have remained overwhelmingly peaceful. On the other side, of course, there are very serious long-term questions about the ability of the state to continue funding itself, and the ability of Jordan to act as a confident player in the international stage at large.
GRN correspondent John Lillywhite reporting from the Jordanian capital, Amman.